South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, Oonagh Monahan has more than 25 years' experience of working with food businesses, and over that time, she has witnessed the trends and the fads which have impacted the industry. A published author, Oonagh's third book, More Money for Jam, is the essential guide for starting a food business in Ireland and the UK. Oonagh joins us now to discuss the ingredients for creating a successful food business. Oonagh, I'd like to hear about your business, Alpha Omega Consultants.
Good morning, Karl. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I'm in business a bit over 15 years, actually. I started out, as most small businesses do, working for somebody else and thinking I could do this better if I worked for myself, and decided to give it a go using the knowledge that I had with working with small food producers, but also having worked in the food sector myself. So what I do is I provide services to food producers who want to start up, but also food producers, for example, who might be developing from what they call spin-out companies from university research, and then also producers who are bigger and already ready to export or who are exporting across Europe or the world.
And from your experience, Oonagh, how are Irish food producers performing in the current market?
It's a challenging market at the minute. There's been kind of one hit after the other over the last 3 years. Obviously, COVID had a major impact. In fact, some of my clients told me that they lost 70% of their business in the first 3 months of COVID because they were, if you like, one of their main customers were in the hospitality sector, and when the restaurants and hotels closed down, they also nearly shut down themselves, and they had to, change direction very quickly. But they did. They were very, very agile, actually. And then after that, of course, came supply chain issues with the unrest in the Middle East and in Ukraine. So it has been a very challenging environment. They're responding well, but not easily, is what I would say. There's been a lot of difficulties.
And what are the major challenges facing small food businesses in Ireland right now?
Supply chain issues, pricing is a big problem. Ingredients costs have gone up a lot. I spoke to somebody recently who buys in big tubs of mayonnaise, and he said the price has doubled, literally doubled, from €20 a bucket to €40 a bucket. And it's very difficult for him to reflect that in his pricing, because very often for producers the pricing is fixed with the retailers. It's a little more easier to do if you're selling through markets. Maybe you can adjust your pricing a little bit, but consumers don't like that. They like to know what cost things are. So trying to manage those price fluctuations in ingredients, I'd say, is one of the biggest challenges. Supply chain issues have been difficult too. Sourcing ingredients has been difficult. And also, of course, the impact of Brexit has meant that exporting to the UK has been very challenging as well. Fine north-south, but more difficult east-west.
And are enough food business owners availing of the financial and business development supports which the government has provided to this sector?
Well, I would say there's still quite a lot of them who don't know about them enough, that they would come to me for advice. And the first place I send them actually is, there's a great website called supportingsmes.gov.ie. And on that, there's kind of a link to a lot of the supports that are out there. Not all of them, but it's a good start. And what I would also say is that some of the established producers never think to go to the local enterprise office. They kind of assume that that's for startups, and it's absolutely not just for startups. So I'd always say to producers, go to your local enterprise office, go to your rural development office, speak to Enterprise Ireland if you're a client there, because they may not come to you. You kind of have to go after them a lot of the time. So I'm a big believer in ask. The worst that can happen is they say no, not me, but somebody else might be able to help you. So I'd say that possibly not the case, that they don't all know what is available to them.
And Oonagh, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, the third edition of your book, More Money for Jam, has just been published. So what topics are covered in this edition of the book?
So what I do is I cover everything from kind of opportunities for small food producers, the importance of local, what is it consumers are looking for, things about looking at your competitors, trying to find a niche in that market, what's your unique selling point. I talk about food safety and hygiene legislation, which is the one thing that usually sends people running for the hills, actually. It can be a bit frightening, a bit scary when they read the legislation, and I've kind of tried to translate that into a bit more everyday language. I talk about product development and ways to approach product development, things like shelf life, outsourcing production. Then we get into routes to market, branding, food tourism, and then you've got labelling and nutrition claims, everything about allergens now, finance, managing money, what training you have to do legally. If you're a food producer, there are a lot of legal requirements. And then I get into quite a few case studies on different topics. I've got a whole new chapter about setting up as a food producer in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Because while I had some mention of that in previous books, this one is much more specific because, again, of the change in legislation.
And as a result of Brexit, what complications has that brought in relation to registering as a food producer across the UK now?
Well, the big issue really is that issue with exporting. So at the moment, as I said, the Windsor framework for North-South, it makes things seamless. It's very straightforward. But to go East-West is much more challenging. And I have heard a story about a smoked salmon producer in Scotland whose market was nearly exclusively Europe. And because of the barriers, if you like, or not barrier is the wrong word, I suppose it's a hurdle, because you can get over it, in terms of the form filling, the documentation that's required, all the customs issues, they've actually gone out of business. It was too much for a producer of their size to be able to manage. Having said that, I'm quite sure there are agencies in the UK that help people with that, but it's very complicated now. It's just not straightforward. In terms of supply for people buying in ingredients into here, it's certainly more difficult. The price has gone up. Customs issues make things more difficult. So I know producers here are looking to source elsewhere, which is going to impact, of course, on people in England. But definitely it's caused more problems than it has any kind of benefit that might have been, at least expounded when Brexit raised its head a number of years ago.
So where do the opportunities exist for new product offerings within the food space today?
There's always the key thing about something, finding your USP, finding your unique selling point. And it depends on what scale of business you're hoping to open up. So if you're looking to do something very local, it could be something very simple as making jams and cakes and selling them in your local village. And if that's what you want to do, that's brilliant. Nobody else could be doing that, and maybe there's a good outlet there for you. If you're looking for bigger, if you're a little bit more ambitious, you might look at what the trends are. The big trends are always health, and health tied in with quality and, if you like, being tasty. So people won't eat healthy food if it doesn't taste good, because they're not going to give up that much of their enjoyment of the food. Another big one, of course, are alternative proteins. So while there is a move into veganism and vegetarianism, that's fairly stable now, and it'll never, I don't believe, outstrip meat eating and, if you like, traditional proteins. It is a growing area where people might decide to eat vegan or vegetarian out of choice. They might do it a few days a week, but not every day. So there is a gap in the market there. Again, it needs to be good quality. And people who are succeeding in that have produced a really nice range of good quality flavoursome foods. So flavour all the way.
So for any aspiring food entrepreneurs that have a product but don't know how to turn it into a business, what should their first steps include?
Well, of course, Karl, I'm going to say they should buy my book, which of course I'm hoping is a really good guide, and they can get it in bookshops and online. But also, I think the first thing to do is, the making of the food is always the easy part. That's what I've always said to people. People get into the food industry because they enjoy making food or growing food, and they want to do something with it. So that's the easy bit. The hard bit is, how do you turn that into a business? And that's where people struggle, is that business side of it. So the very first step I would say is do your market research. Go and have a look and see what is available in your area or where you want to sell, and see is there a gap in the market. Or if there are competitors, and there always will be, how can you tweak yours, or how can you position yours in such a way that it grabs people's attention to make it a little bit different? So, for example, maybe there's loads of people making apple tarts in your area, but you've got your own orchard. So you can say, we're making apple tarts with our own apples. So some little angle, have an angle, is what I'd say. But you need to think about this as a business. It's not just a hobby anymore, and to turn that into a business is a lot more work than a lot of people think about.
And when you look at that balanced scorecard framework, is it usually the sales and marketing side of the business that are most challenging for those?
Yeah, they're certainly very challenging. One of the most challenging things, though, for food producers, for small food producers, is distribution. That's, I think, probably the single biggest challenge of all, because getting your food from where you make it to your consumer's table, or to the retailer at least, can be really difficult. In the beginning, what will happen is that the producer will do all the driving themselves. You're going to be chief bottle washer, baker, plumber, manager, whatever else has to be done, and also logistics person. So you're going to be putting the stuff in your car or in your van or whatever you have and driving it all around the place. That takes a lot of time. It's time that you could be spending back at home in the kitchen or back in your production unit making food or doing some management. So I think that is actually the single biggest challenge of all.
In terms of multiples and engaging and negotiating with multiples, what advice do you provide food producers with in this regard?
So what I say is, I go in and remember, you're there to negotiate, to do business. Okay, so if they take you on your books, it's fantastic, but they're not doing you a favour. Okay, so the reason they're taking you into their shops is because they want to sell your food and make money for themselves as well. And there's some great programs out there to help producers do that. And they take you in for a couple of weeks at a time and see how that works out. And then if it goes well, they might take you back in later on seasonally, or they might decide to list you. But it is a great way of getting into shops through any of those schemes. And I have all the information about those in the book. When it comes to other retailers, you have to approach them directly. And I have the contact details for Tesco and for Dunn's and for all the other retailers actually in the book as well. So it's a matter of making contact with them. It can take some time to get that listing, as they call it, to get in with them. And there's a lot of work to do to make sure that you're compliant with their requirements. They'll have pages and pages of forms for you to fill in to make sure you've got your food safety systems in place and everything. But they will work with you a lot of the time to make sure that you're doing things the way they want them done, but also to make sure that you can get something from it as well. Simply Better range from Dunn's is a great example, actually, where they work really, really closely with the producer to develop that line. It's under the Simply Better banner, though. It doesn't have your name on the packaging, but it does list you as the supplier on the back of the label somewhere. So that's a really good example of partnership, I think.
And Oonagh, I've also noticed that you have a Wexford company as a case study within your book.
Well, I have to admit, I haven't worked with Scoop directly, but I came across them as a really, really good example of an Irish, if you like, born dairy company. And I was reading a lot about them and following their progress myself. So when I came to looking for a good case study for the ice cream sector, I thought they were a really obvious one. So I got in touch, and I was really delighted that they were happy to be included in the book. It's a really good example of, you've got a family business, they saw a gap in the market, they developed a really high-quality product. They were very clear about their route to market. They actually went the food service or hospitality route first before they went to consumers. And they do pop-up shops, so they've got really nice kind of angles to their business, good USPs, and their branding is really cute as well. I really like that. So that's why I was delighted to include them.
And finally, Oonagh, what are your predictions for the Irish food sector over the coming years?
I would be always optimistic with the food sector. I'm amazed and always, if you like, really impressed with the number of food producers that start up every year and the ones that really make a go of it, make a success of it. I've always said food producers are the hardest working people that I've come across. They really work hard because they're definitely not in it for the money, and the profit margins are very small. But the quality of food in Ireland is second to none. The reputation of food in Ireland is really, really high, and also among the very top ones in Europe. So I'm very optimistic for the future of the sector.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Oonagh Monahan from Alpha Omega Consultants, and I'd like to thank Oonagh for sharing her knowledge of the food industry with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.